Today we're going to be wrapping up the series on living the good life and talking about generosity. You know, there's something truly special about a generous person. You know it when you see it. That switch that happens in Ebenezer Scrooge from the day before Christmas to Christmas morning is really a switch in generosity. That's the switch that flips in him. And we view that character as someone completely different from the night before to the day before. FYI, the Disney cartoon version of A Christmas Carol is underrated, and it's among the best versions. And it's only a half hour long. So that's my film recommendation for today. And it's one thing to share with family, friends, neighbors, things like that. But that's kind of an assumed thing that we're going to share with the people that are closest to us. And then it's something else to be generous with strangers. The way this church rallied around Anya and sharing those school supplies with people that we've never met and never will meet. That's pretty awesome. And then there are those people who share, who are generous all the time in all kinds of ways with all kinds of people that they'll never ever meet. And so what I wanted to do, doing my research for today, I wanted to find a list of the world's most generous people. And so I Googled it. That's how we do things. And there was no class on that in seminary. I just figured that out, that awesome technique all by myself. And there's actually a website that tracked the charitable contributions of some of the wealthiest people in the world. And it showed not only the dollar amounts, how much they've given away over the course of their lifetime, but also the percentage of total wealth. So how much of this person's wealth, like how much of their current value have they given away over time? And so some pretty phenomenal numbers, like Bill Gates, who we know is kind of this great philanthropist, his rating was 32%. Pretty awesome. And Warren Buffett, his rating was 35%. And I was scrolling down the list, and there was another number that popped off the page. It was 420,000%. I thought, that's interesting. How does that math work? Yeah. And there was someone on the list who had given away nearly 600 times as much money as he was currently worth. He was working to give away his entire fortune, and you've probably never heard of him. So you want to hear of him now? Yeah. His name is Chuck Feeney. And he grew up in a humble, hardworking home in New Jersey where he watched his parents constantly caring for others. And he made his fortune through duty-free shoppers and back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and has been on a nearly 30-year mission to give his entire fortune away. In 1984, he transferred his 38% of this company, of his multi-billion-dollar company, into a foundation that gives grants to charities all over the world. And you'll never find his name on a hospital or a bridge or a building, university building. He saves that spot, the name marker for these buildings, for for more egocentric donors who need that little cookie to make their donations. He doesn't need that, and he doesn't want it. They're going to throw in extra cash towards something so that his donations go further. So he's perfectly content to stay anonymous. And all the while, he's watching his personal fortune dwindle away as it is used to make the world a better place. In an interview with Forbes magazine, Feeney says, "People who have money have an obligation." And so he's actually been the inspiration for those other guys I mentioned, for Bill Gates, for Warren Buffett, and together they've created a pledge with over 90 of the world's richest people on it to give away most of their wealth before they die. To give away a vast amount of their money before then, because it's easy to give it away after you're dead. But to actually be an example for what generosity looks like and the right use of wealth if you're the kind of person that has that. Feeney also says, I wouldn't say I'm entitled to tell them what to do with their money, but to use it wisely. And the truth is, we all have money. You rode it here in a car with gas in it that you paid for. You're wearing clothes you bought at a store. You've got a wallet with plastic in it that is somehow connected to money that you are able to spend, whether it's yours or whether you have to pay for it later. The truth is we all have money. We don't have Bill Gates money or Chuck Feeney money, but we have just what we have. And we're under no less obligation to use it wisely, if you ask me. And I want to look at our money, and I want to look at this idea of generosity through the lens of a lesson that Jesus gave as he saw a widow making her offering at the temple one day. So we're going to look at this story of a widow giving her offering, and then we're going to talk about 3 behaviors that develop generosity in that story. Those behaviors are practice, gratitude, and trust. And we'll get into those in a minute. But first I want to read this story. It's from Luke chapter 21. Just then Jesus looked up and saw the rich people dropping offerings in the collection plate. Then he saw a poor widow put in 2 pennies. He said, the plain truth is that this widow has given by far the largest offering today. All these others made offerings that they'll never miss. She gave extravagantly what she couldn't afford. She gave her all. So this is a profound story. Jesus is actually watching these events unfold as he's relating this lesson related to it. And I think there are at least 3 key life practices that we can pull out of this story that we can apply to our own lives so that we can grow into the kind of person who can be generous without being begrudging about it. So the first is practice. See, the simple truth is you don't become a generous person overnight. I took my 4-year-old to a birthday party yesterday. Yeah. And some of you were there. And my little guy Silas, he was fighting with the birthday boy over every toy in the house in the moments leading up to the kind of the festivities beginning. We kept telling both of the kids to share in as many different ways as we could express share. Does it really matter who plays with the truck right now? Does that really matter? No, it doesn't really matter who plays with the truck right now. And we could just, take it from one kid and give it to the other and do it by force. But we are trying to get them to do the behavior for a very specific reason. We're trying to instill patterns of generosity in these kids that we hope will stay with them. Because being generous takes practice. That's the idea. Generosity must be learned. It must be practiced. And think now about the widow that Jesus saw making that offering. See, first you have to understand the place of a widow in Jesus' society. It was a very male-dominated time and place in the world where you couldn't have a job or have money of your own unless you were a male. And so the only way that a woman could work her way in the world was to be married to a man. And I'm not calling it right, because it ain't, but I'm calling it how it was. All right? That's the world that Jesus entered into. And so, if a woman's husband died, she was just destitute. She was just done unless she could get remarried. And so she depended on the gifts of others to get by because she couldn't actually have any meaningful work of her own. And that's the place of a widow in Jesus' society. They were universally poor. And if they were young enough when they became widows, maybe if they were lucky enough, they could be prostitutes to make a living. And those were about your options. And this woman was a widow. And that means at some point, she had a husband. She had income. She had a home. Chances are, her pattern of sacrificial giving did not begin when she was destitute. It was something that she had already learned from her life when she had means of some kind. And that carried over even when she fell on the roughest of times. So you might not have much to be generous with right now, but like Chuck Feeney says, people with money have an obligation. So you need to start practicing now. Start flexing your generosity muscle now. Even if it doesn't feel like you can make much difference with the money that you have to offer, someday, when your ship comes in, remember me, and remember the practice that you've developed over the course of a lifetime, learning how to be generous. So if you can be generous now with the little you have, you'll be able to be generous with much. So that's the first practice, is practice. Practice, practice, practice on being generous. Gratitude is the second step. It's the second behavior that will build generosity into your life. And I mean, it's obvious and clear from the way that Jesus interprets the actions of this widow that she didn't give out of obligation. There was no one telling her that she had to give. I think if anyone in the world had an excuse not to live, it's this widow in this story. So what was her motivation for giving? Going back to toddlers, have you ever forced a child to share? That goes over great, doesn't it? The screaming, the tears, and that's just you after they're finally in bed for the night. But what about seeing one of your own children share without any suggestion? Simply out of their own free will, out of the goodness of their hearts, how do you feel then? Yeah, you feel prideful. Yeah, you're like, I've done a good job. Way to go, Parent of the Year application in the mail. And it comes from a very special place. It comes from a genuine place. And it's beautiful, right? And that's what made the widow's gift so valuable. And I believe that her motivation for giving was gratitude. See, she wouldn't give as an attempt to bribe God. Some people say, well, God, look at all that I've given for you, so now things should work out right for me, right? But what could 2 cents do to the person, to the one who made the heavens and the earth and everything in it? She wouldn't give because she had to. She has every excuse not to give. She looked around at her life, small and insignificant as it was, and saw something to thank God for. What about you? Are you able to thank God for your life? So one of the best ways to tell God thanks is to show generosity. It's a sign that you value this life and the giver of life more than your things. Whatever you do with that generosity, it's almost immaterial, because you're showing that the things that are material, that belong to you, they don't own you. So, develop your own personal generosity through practice, through gratitude, and finally, through trust. I believe that at our core, the number one reason we find it hard to be generous with our possessions is that we don't truly trust God. And that's really hard for me to say as a pastor to all of my people who are here in church with me, because that's, you're my flock and we're all super awesome at trusting God together, but, to a point, right? And it's true of me too. When I lack generosity, it's because I'm not trusting God deeply and truly enough. We don't really believe that if we give thoughtfully, prayerfully, that God will care for our needs and God won't leave us hanging. The widow in the story did not have disposable income. So if you've seen a movie or eaten out or bought something just for fun, you are substantially better off than she is. So there's really no comparison between where we are at in the world and where she is at in her world. There's no comparison, even if you feel like you are poor. She's a whole different flavor of poor. All right. She couldn't live without these 2 pennies that she put in the offering. She could barely live with those 2 pennies, and she still gave them away. And I think it's because she knew this simple truth. It's better to live with nothing but faith than it is to live with everything except faith. It's better to live with nothing but faith than it is to have everything except faith. Many of you know that Jenny and I, Jenny's my wife and our worship leader. Hi, Jenny. Jenny and I have been living off of an extra dose of trust in God for the last few months. Last year, some of Northern Lights funding sources were a startup church, and so we aren't fully self-sustaining. We've got some outside funding sources. Some of those sources discontinued. And so we've had to make budget cutbacks that impact our personal income quite a bit. And throughout this process, we worked hard and saved hard so that we could join Jenny's family for a big family vacation out to the Black Hills over the summer. It was a really good time. And we had just stopped at the store to pick up a few last supplies. And we were running our camping equipment over to her parents' house to pack it in before leaving in the morning. And that's when we saw them on the corner by the store. A family with 2 young kids, a baby and a child no older than 2. Their color did not fit in with the Andover landscape. They were clearly out-of-towners in this white suburban neighborhood with a cardboard sign that said they needed help. And as Jenny and I turned the corner past them, we kind of looked at each other and realized that we had more money in our savings than we had had in a long time, and we were just going on vacation. What do you think? What we do? And I don't know how much Jenny had in mind, but I said, let's just. This is our gift to God in this moment. Let's just tithe off of our vacation fund. So let's take 1/10 off the top and bring it back to them. And so that's what we did. We went to the cash machine, we drove back around. They were still there, and I had a conversation with them. And I got to hear their story that he had sold everything and moved out from the East Coast to Minnesota. They were actually English. I'm pretty sure they were Roma ethnicity, and that they had sold everything, moved out here for a job that didn't exist when they got here. And so all they had was their car with these 2 small kids. And so I gave them what we had, and talk about gratitude. He was overwhelmed, and that now, I don't know how much they had brought in earlier in the day, but because of our gift that was actually, pretty small in the grand scheme of things, they could pack up their sign, go in, buy supper, and find a hotel to stay for the night. Now, I don't tell you this story to brag about our generosity, because we still wrestle with that all the time. I tell you because this is the fruit of building generosity into your life. Start practicing. Embrace gratitude, trusting God, and you'll start to see the life-giving opportunities to share with those around you that you might have missed, that you might be missing right now. This family had food to eat and a place to sleep tonight, not because of a moment's inspiration to give, but because of years of growing in generosity, that when that moment came, our hearts were prepared to give. People with money have an obligation. But there's more to it than that. Obligation is kind of a yucky word. God wants you to live generously because this is real living. being the kind of person who can give away their belongings illustrates that your possessions don't possess you. Being the kind of person who can give away your belongings illustrates that your possessions don't possess you. Being generous enriches your life as you make the world a better place, as you live out the example of the widow and her coin, the example of Jesus, whose generosity led him to give up his very life for the sake of the world. So, I'm going to share a little generosity with you today. Grab this back here. I stuck it back here, didn't I?
It's back on the table.
Oh, yeah, it's sitting back on the table still. So, actually, since it's back there, Delta, yeah, and Sean, you don't need to bring it up here. What I have are little cards is it back by the box? Right, yeah, okay. Can you bring that? Pick it up and bring it to Dale, thank you. So, it's got a bunch of little cards, and they have the story of the widow on them, on one side, and it's got 2 cents taped to the other side. This card is small enough that you can stick it in your wallet. That's what I'd like to encourage you to do today, is stick it someplace where you'll see it often, as a reminder to practice, to be grateful for what you have, and to trust in God and God's provision, and to know for certain that you will always be a person who has money. And people with money have an obligation. And even this widow knew that. May they remind you that generosity is a simple thing, but it requires practice and gratitude and trust. And that through generosity you can live the good life, the life that God created you to live, through simple acts of kindness and generosity. Pray with me. God, we thank you that you model for us what it looks like to give. We see the stories in the Bible that tell us the fruit of generosity, and you model it for us in your very life, giving your life for us. And we ask that you would help us to follow you in generosity. That you would help us to see giving as a valuable and integral way of understanding your love for this world. And it also helps us to communicate that love to those who receive our gifts and those who wonder why we would give so very much. Bless us today as we respond to your Spirit speaking within us, calling us to be generous. In Jesus' name, amen.